I'm a nutritional therapist. My actual job is to sit down with you and help you feel better based on how your body works and based on you as an individual. Nutrition is only one string of the overall well-being picture, and actually being happy, being surrounded by good people is just as good. And there was a very definitive dip in the afternoon, especially after we've eaten lunch. So we get to that little afternoon dip, we're sitting at the desk and we're like, okay, we need a little bit of energy, or I'm bored out of my mind. The quickest way to get that little hit of feel-good hormones is to have something carbohydrate-based or something sugary. It's the reason those things exist. They're so hard to avoid. We are in a capitalist view of wellness. If you look at the well-being industry, the idea of productivity, it is there, like it's plain to see. But then if we really are looking at the difference between the 90s and now, we still have to work just as hard. At least there are things to support us now.
Eva, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I want to talk to you about nutrition, what you're an expert in, what your qualifications are in, but slightly different because you sort of discuss how nutrition broadly is very rigid. There's lots of rules. And you use the word of blown out of proportion, which I think is quite an interesting term of phrase to use for it as well. And then you contrast that with your approach to nutrition, which is more relaxed. And I guess from there you could maybe say more sustainable. You could make lots of arguments like that as well. But I want to know your view on it, why you think it is blown out of proportion and what you sort of mean by that.
Sure. I mean, that is genuinely a really interesting question and not one that I've been asked before. So kudos
good or bad?
Kudos to you for making this podcast already really interesting. What I mean by this idea of nutrition being blown out of proportion is fundamentally nutrition is there to feed us and to make us feel incredible. Like the entire point of nutrition is that we feel really good through the food that we're eating. And I feel that a lot of the time the science has been hijacked for the benefit of wellness products that aren't necessarily there to help us feel better, but they are there to make huge profits. So I would say that's predominantly what I mean by it's been hijacked a little bit, but also really blown out of proportion. Are we paying a little bit too much attention to it as well? I think would be my question, which I know is a really big one considering I am a clinical nutritionist and it's my actual living to provide nutrition advice. It's an interesting topic. I really want to reevaluate what it looks like in 5 or 10 years' time with the advent of social media, because since I started in nutrition especially, things have changed a lot. I mean, when I initially started...
And it's 10 years you've been doing it right, just to give context.
Yeah, so of course, to give context, my background's in IT, and at aged, how old was I? Like 25-ish. I had a bit of a quarter-life crisis whilst working on a project. We were given individual iPads to 0 to 4-year-olds, and I had a bit of a look around and thought, I don't know if I'm adding back into society doing this, because fundamentally those kids should be chatting to each other. And I had a real, you have those like random moments where you go, is this what I want in life? What do I really want in life? And I suppose mine just happened fairly early on in my IT career. And I kind of sat down and I went, okay, what do I really enjoy? I really enjoy well-being. I've always been quite a sporty kid. I've always really enjoyed eating. So I thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to become a chef. This seems like a really great idea. And then having looked at the limitations of becoming a chef, partway through a career, I thought, no, perhaps it's not as good as a fit as I wanted to be, especially from a wellness perspective at the time. And then I just really, really randomly found a nutrition course, a really highly regarded nutrition course that had an open day that weekend. And I went along and instantly signed up, spent 3 years studying, and then came out the other end of it. So I initially signed up 14 years ago. And I've been qualified for 10. Just coming up to 10 actually. So yeah, when I initially started in nutrition, I genuinely thought that everyone got it. Everyone wanted to be super healthy and everyone understood the concept of feeling really good. And what I really very quickly realized when I graduated is that actually that was the polar opposite. We didn't really understand the concept of wellness beyond, here's a person that wants to slap cake out of my hand. And remember, my motivation for going into nutrition was very much food-led. So it's actually the last thing that I wanted to achieve. I really love cake. If someone tried to take cake away from me, I'd be like, no, please go away. that's not really what it's about. And the concept of nutrition was always just about adding nutrients in. So when I initially graduated, I almost had this moment of, okay, well, what do I do now? I had this brilliant career in IT. Nutrition really had my heart, but also I now need to make a business of this. And no one actually understands nutrition or what it stands for. I would say that changed a lot with lockdowns, and that naturally, I think, made a lot of individuals pay attention to their health a lot more, which then shone the light onto nutrition way more than was the case previously. But I feel now we're going too far with it. I don't know if you would agree based on what you see online.
There's so much misinformation out there as well, which is what the frightening thing is. And there's a lot of advice into how to optimize every element of your life. And it's something I've actually put quite a lot of thought into because, you know, obviously I get to have all of these amazing conversations with all of these experts, and there's so many tips from each episode. But sustainably, we probably can have 3 to 5 things that we have in our day-to-day life if we have a focus on nutrition. You know, are we waking up and not going on our phone, on maybe going outside, making sure we have water? But you know, you can pick whatever things you want, but it's hard to actually optimize every element of your life. And I think even the word optimize is thrown out so much that we're almost like a project, a robot that we need to optimize our wellness because it's another work thing. And it's something that, like, wellness is something to be enjoyed. Exercise is something to be enjoyed, that we can go out and we can enjoy spending time with people, moving our body, feeling how that moves, getting faster, getting fitter, whatever sort of thing floats your boat. But it's not another job. It's not another productivity measure of our success, of our worth, of our value, which, you know, I need to remind myself of that. Like, I'm saying it as though it's, you know, really obvious and I've mastered it. But this is like a daily thing because of, I think, that constant flow of information, which is kind of the contrast from what you said when you started. No one really knew, and now everyone seems to know, which means everyone's giving their 10 pence and what they think is best, which some of it's great, some of it's less great, but it's quite overwhelming.
I 100% agree. I fully agree. The amount of information that's out there in nutrition, and in fact, pick any wellbeing topic, it is hugely overwhelming. It really is. And I think you picked on a really interesting one with this idea of optimization, because what does that even mean? My only worry with the optimization side. So, okay, right. Slight backtrack. I'm a nutritional therapist. So my actual job is to sit down with you and help you feel better based on how your body works and based on you as an individual and your limitations. And by limitations, I mean, you know, we all live our lives slightly differently. Some of us might work 12-hour days, some of us might work 5-hour days. And my job is to go, okay, what is realistic for you to achieve to help you feel that little bit better? There is usually a health variable like IBS or, you know, type 2 diabetes or something along those lines. But by and large, my job is to go, you as an individual, how can we help you feel better? And I often see, like you, I often see all of these different programs online, and it's all about this idea and concept of optimization. And my ultimate question is always, they have this really rigid program, but who is the optimum for? And if it's not doable, is that defeating the purpose already? Because if it's not doable, how is it optimal? Optimal surely means it's sustainable, it's doable, and it helps you feel better.
It's such a strange thing because if we're optimizing for longevity, another bit of a, you know, hot topic at the moment, because we want to live 5 to 10 years longer, or we want to whatever it is, you know, obviously there are massive benefits to it, and we can prevent lots of different health situations. But if we're doing it at the expense of the joy that we can experience in the present moment, then actually where is that optimizing coming in? Because we're living by such a strict regime, spending all of our money on these supplements or whatever it is that is hot and trendy, that maybe we don't actually want. Like, if you want to spend your money on that, absolutely go for it. Like, that's a different thing. But in terms of feeling like you need, like, you're a project that you're optimizing, you know, that we're going to get our best out of it, it is that enjoyment of actually what fits into your life. And I think even what you said there about what are people's limitations, it's a conversation that not every nutritionist is actually going to have. They're not going to think, well, actually, where is the ceiling here? Where, of course, if you can cook every meal from scratch, buy organic vegetables, and, you know, not eat refined sugar or limit your refined sugar intake, of course that's going to be really beneficial. Like, we know that. And a lot of the information of, like, nutritionists say, like, people do know that, but they need that accountability and they need it broken down and applied to their life. It's like, you know the facts, but how does that actually apply to, you know, Emily in my day to day of what life I'm going to live? Because that's where the difficulty comes, because there's the understanding and then there's the application, and I guess a nutritionist sort of comes in to sandwich it in the middle.
We do, and I think it's like you mentioned, there is all of this information being thrown at us, and my job really is to go, what bit of information is actually applicable to you as an individual? Because, you know, there's no point optimizing your omega-3 levels if they're already fine. Whereas if you went online, I mean, I'm picking on omega-3s because it's what I'm chatting about at the moment on social media. But if you went online, there'd be an overwhelming amount of information that's focusing on that one single nutrient. And actually, is that even a variable for you? So they're the types of questions that I'm asking. But I fully agree with you. I think we need to relax and take a bigger overview of what's humanly possible, what's feasible for us, and what helps us achieve more joy. Because life is short, and if we can't do it with joy, then what is the point? Like, what is the point living to 100, having rigidly controlled our sugar intake down to the finest amount of grams? Like, really, the bigger picture is that nutrition is only one string of the overall well-being picture, and actually being happy, being surrounded by good people is just as good.
Yeah, I think that the word I would use is hyperfixation that people have on certain things, and you use the example of omega-3 there. But even if we use it on something that we're perhaps trying to cut out, then that can actually cause quite a lot of, like, mentally it can really have impacts on your body as well. So say you're going to count the amount of sugar that you have, or processed foods, which in today's society and culture, it's difficult because they're hidden. It's really hard to know. Even if you buy the wrong soy sauce, gosh, you know, you can end up with so many added preservatives that you didn't even realize. And when you apply that to everything that you buy in the supermarket, is really overwhelming. And then if you maybe are someone who's prone to anxiety, gosh, that's going to be even more. Like, if you're on a very tight budget, gosh, you're going to be even more stressed, because naturally, you know, it's cheaper to make these ultra processed foods, generally speaking. So they are cheaper, they're more accessible. And we actually touched before we started recording about the price of food and how it's, people get quite annoyed about the price of food, you know, and food is expensive. But then also that our mindset approach has completely changed in terms of the proportion of our income that we actually spend on food, that we're prepared to spend on food. So it's an interesting sort of topic about how mentally, if we hyperfixate on what we're going to do, and, you know, maybe we're not sleeping very well because we're so worried about money, because we're trying to optimize what we're going to eat and buying healthy food, then actually any benefit from buying all of that healthy food is probably negated by the fact that we're not sleeping very well, because unfortunately it's all linked together. And it is those pillars of, you know, sleep, nutrition, fitness or exercise and movement, you know, they're so fundamental to our overall health, our overall wellness, that unfortunately actually they're so interlinked that if one part is out of proportion, it has such a knock-on effect that can actually be negatively impacting some of the benefits or ground that you're making in the other points.
It is confusing, and it is hugely overwhelming, and this is why I'm very, let's focus on what we can achieve rather than, you know, all these different variables that need optimizing and cutting out and shaping in a different way. Like, you're so right, we're not projects, we're not these random projects. And I think if I really just look at the way that I work as a nutritionist, I always focus on adding things in rather than worrying about, you know, how processed the food typically is. I worry about whether you're getting enough nutrients. So, right, I have clients from all walks of life. I have individuals that struggle with food affordability, and I have individuals on the other end of the scale who have really high rates of affordability but are very time poor. And I think critically what it comes down to is meeting you where you are. I was having a really interesting conversation with a client not long ago who's a little bit older. So my specialism as a nutritionist is in type 2 diabetes, and it's also in geriatric nutrition. So this idea of healthy aging and, I suppose, feeling better in later life, that's my jam. And I was having a conversation with this lady, and she was saying to me, I find it really weird that there are all these different cuts of meat that I just no longer see in supermarkets that were just the very norm when I was a child. And she was like, they were really cheap. So she used the idea of a lamb breast. She said they used to get it from the butcher and it was a few pence. And it came with bones, and her father used to debone it, and then they'd roll it and they'd make like a delicious meal out of it. Now we're selling that same thing it was in Sainsbury's this week actually, already deboned for a premium price. So I think this idea of premium cuts versus using a whole animal, there is definitely a skills gap that we're experiencing now that we would probably benefit from in order to help food affordability. And I'm no expert on the food systems by any means. Again, I'm a nutritionist. My job is to help you feel better for longer. I would love to know where those gaps are in the food systems, because if we walk into a supermarket these days, we see a lot of really premium cuts of meat being sold for quite high prices, and we don't really see the lesser cuts. So where are they going? And are they being represented to us in a processed food, for example? Could we make better use of those? So they're the kind of questions that I'm asking on that end. And then on the other end of the spectrum with, low time, for example, I'm asking the questions of how can I sneak in more nutrients in addition to whatever you're eating already? One of the biggest challenges right now is to try and get breakfast into individuals that are really high flying, that are used to having a cup of coffee and going straight into work, and to try and get some nourishment at the beginning of the day where there is a probability of a break, rather than waiting until the very end when everyone's really hungry and then anything goes. So really, just reconfirming, we just need to meet you where you are as an individual and then figure out what gives and what matters.
And I guess a huge part of it, and what you really, talked about already in terms of limitations, but also expectations, realistic expectations of what someone can actually implement into their life. There are people who will be working 12-hour days. There'll be people who are working 5-hour days, working night shifts, staying at home, looking after children. There's so many different variables of lives that people will listen, like even people listening, everyone will be living such a different life and will have different schedules and therefore different expectations really, and what we want to get out of food and what sort of life that we want to live with that. But if we hone in a little bit, you mentioned your background in IT, you worked long days in the offices is somewhere I find it fascinating, slight tangent, but like the setup of an office, the strip lighting, the noise, the lack of soft furnishings or relaxation in terms of there's no green, it's just generally white or magnolia or something, and it's a quite, if you set your living room up like that, people would think you were quite strange. And obviously your living room is meant for a place of relaxation, and a workplace is meant for productivity. But in terms of like our mental well-being, it's quite an interesting setup. But then of course you add in strict meal times, probably, and then you add in the work snacks. How do we actually manage that? Because office work can be really boring. Like, even if you have a fantastic job that you love, there's going to be times when you're sitting there and you're thinking, I do not want to be staring at the screen. It doesn't feel very natural. My eyes hurt. Oh, I'm just going to have some crisps. Or I'm going to go to the vending machine. Or I'm going to go down the street and buy some sweets. Or someone's brought sweets in, even better, and I'm just going to eat more, even though I feel a bit sick. Or everybody will sort of relate to that in some way at some point, especially if you're in the office every day. What was your experience with office nutrition? What is your experience maybe then and now, and how the conversation unfolds about that?
So my experience of office nutrition was probably quite humorous, but probably also very stereotypically office-based. So I worked in one of those offices that you described, like a very soulless, desk-to-desk kind of environment. Amazing people and, great company to work for, but it was one of those soulless offices. And what we had a lot, which I'm not sure if still happens or not, is we used to have a lot of vendors coming with snacks and treats, or it'd be like Friday cake day. It varied, but there were definitely a lot of snacks around. And when the vendors came in with treats, it was, like a pizza delivery or a donut delivery, there'd be just trays and trays of donuts. It was never anything remotely healthy. And then come to Christmas and the selection boxes start coming out, boxes of biscuits start coming out. And I think as an individual, we're really heavily influenced by our environment. We are. Like, have you ever tried sitting in an office with a cake tin, some biscuits, and some chocolate, and then went, you know what, I'm going to resist? That genuinely is the minority of individuals.
Or
It's
you make it
hard.
until like 2 p.m.
Yeah,
and then you
and then you
crash.
get
You
really
might have
hungry.
got through the morning. Also, just like to say here, like, we're not demonizing eating chocolate or eating sweets or anything, but it's just that boredom. I think it's that boredom instinct of not actually wanting it. Like, you don't want it, but it's just there. It's not that it's bad to eat the donuts.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't make sense because we don't want it. We know it won't help us, but it's just that level of it.
Look, when you're in that kind of monotone environment, right? I'm sure individuals listening to this will be like, I really love my job and I sit in one of those offices. Honestly, amazing. Like, I love that for you. But there is a point in the afternoon where we have a natural slope in our energy. We do. It's how the circadian rhythm works. The circadian rhythm dictates when we wake up and when we fall asleep. And there is a very definitive dip in the afternoon for most people. I'm not saying it's going to be everyone, but most people have that little dip in the afternoon, especially after we've eaten lunch as well. So we get to that little afternoon dip, we're sitting at the desk and we're like, okay, we need a little bit of energy, or I'm bored out of my mind. The quickest way to get that little hit of feel-good hormones is to have something carbohydrate-based or something sugary. It's the reason those things exist, and it's the reason those things are so hard to avoid because we all just want that little feel-good thing, don't we? So I completely hear that office thing, and I have been there. The other part of the office scenario was, I don't know what your experience is like of that circumstance, but mine was very definitely everyone starting a diet on a Monday. That was very much the realm of when I was in an office as well. Or the other side is that I'd be out for meetings all day, in which case nourishment was very limited. So now as a nutritionist, I look at those times and I go, you know what? Realistically, what helps? Because I lived through that. I've experienced the vendor trays of donuts and sitting there, bored in the afternoon. And I've also experienced driving 3 hours for a meeting, a 1 hour meeting, and then driving 3 hours back, which is hard. And then what nutrition looks like in that realm. So I really use those experiences now and try and help my clients accordingly, having lived it.
And what is your advice to people who are listening to this and going like, yeah, I see that, I feel that? What sort of examples would you say to give to them?
My top recommendation is going back to that preloading with nutrients. So having a really good breakfast. I would say that getting lots of nutrients in at the beginning of the day, and in fact, there is quite a lot of research on this, especially for protein, that if you preload with protein and have quite a bit of protein for breakfast and nutrients, not just protein by itself, like not a protein shake, if we want a good breakfast, we say like eggs and a few veggies. That would be a good example. That cravings hit a lot less later in the day. We tend to experience cravings a lot less. And I think this idea of then having that base of nourishment, which then also hopefully helps the individual focus a lot better as well, puts less pressure on having to scrabble around for any form of nourishment because your brain has stopped working. I see that a lot when we don't, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but I'm not naturally a morning person. I don't naturally want breakfast in the morning, but if I don't eat breakfast in the morning, circa 10 o'clock, my brain goes into absolute low battery mode. And whether I want to admit to it or not, I don't function as well. And I have been there to kid myself about this and be like, I'm not a morning person, I don't need breakfast. I function totally differently if I don't. So having that little hit of nutrients very first thing in the morning helps us focus better and just have that base of nourishment, so we're not craving things and we're not having to rely on those office snacks later in the day for some form of energy. I don't really put any emphasis in going, you know what, don't ever touch those office treats, because again, like, life is a little bit too short. I put emphasis on adding the nutrients in first and seeing what that looks like, because it's a lot easier to not overeat those treats if we've got nutrients already in our system and we already feel nourished and good and our brain is functioning. Because if it doesn't, then our default is sugar, please. And that is the normal human default.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll throw this out to you. What's the first thing you crave when you're really hungry?
It's something quick and easy, isn't it? Sugar. You just want that. If you feel really hungry and you have a chocolate bar and a banana in your bag, what are you going to eat? You're probably going to eat the chocolate bar.
It's our default is to crave carbs when we're really hungry. So basically, if you leave the tank empty, we are always going to default to overeating carbs. If we put something in the tank, then it's much easier.
Yeah, exactly. And that just is very much the not restricting side, but just adding more in. It's not that, if you're still hungry and you've eaten your box of nuts that you've brought, and you have a chocolate bar, like, eat the chocolate bar, enjoy it, but don't just fill up on it and then have that sugar crash afterwards. It is just that what's sustainable for you. And something I've seen you refer to as well in terms of like the office environment is actually how, the top down from the companies, how they actually look after their employees, like what employee well-being looks like. What are your views on that? Are companies getting it wrong, or what do you think?
You queued this up really nicely. I was actually going to say that I go into offices now on a corporate wellbeing basis. So I'll, do a little light-hearted chat around nutrition and tell a lot of silly stories because that's pretty much my style of corporate wellbeing. And I would say that a lot of the offices are getting so much better now. I mean, when I was in an office, having fruit in the office was not a thing. Now is definitely the preference over having, boxes and boxes of chocolates. Although the odd office I go into, they are very pro a beer fridge, which is locked until a Friday, I think, usually. I don't know where I sit with that. It's like up until Friday, it's a complete tease, and then on Friday it's a free for all. But I would say by and large, offices are getting much better, and well-being has become much more of a thing now. I think there is this recognition that employees that are well tend to be more productive, and that is very research based right now. That, well, I suppose it's common sense, right? If we don't feel well, we don't really want to work as much. It's just the way that it is. And so people are paying attention to it. I'm seeing really fantastic examples of well-being programs within businesses that are just absolutely stellar. And then I'm also seeing ones that are, of course, there always will be ones that are just paying lip service to it and are just ticking a box.
And what do these programs look like? What is a good example of a wellness program within a company?
A really good examples of wellness programs look at everything. They don't just look at nutrition in a silo, or they don't just look at exercise in a silo. They look at well-being as a whole. So be it mental, physical, literally every single string of the bow. And they put really good programs in to support their employees at each of those areas. The really, really fantastic ones offer a more personalized service. So that's allowing people to have access to therapy if they need it, allowing people to have access to a nutritionist if they need it, having private medical. So I suppose, how far do you want to get carried away with it? But I have seen some really beautiful examples where you could, if there is anything at all that you're concerned about, or if there's anything at all that you want to change, your employer is there to support you. Some really fantastic examples.
And you think about it, like, that's fantastic. But ultimately, they want you to be more productive. They want to optimize you. And maybe that is actually a really interesting example of effective optimization. Like, it's an example of when it works in a good way, because sure, we are effectively being optimized by these things so that we'll be a better employee. But there are these benefits of it. Maybe, you do get these things complementary, like there's no such thing as free anything. But in terms of, there are really healthy breakfasts at work, and that's something that really you can incorporate into your lifestyle, and it actually has that benefit for your health, for your work output, but also just your life in general. So it is quite interesting how that view on it is quite commercial, because you can sort of see, why is a company going to be paying for you to go to therapy? Probably so that mentally you're thriving somewhat more. and you're going to be able to therefore put more energy into the productivity. So it's quite a sadistic look at it when you do look at it in that way. But equally, it can be really beneficial because, again, you're improving yourself and you're fixing anything that you really want to highlight, because it's unlikely, well, actually, I'm not sure, but I would be surprised if these were mandatory programs. Like, it's a voluntary, I guess, would it be a voluntary situation, or how do these wellness programs sort of work? Is it an opt-in, opt-out, or what? How do you see it like working in practice?
The vast majority that I have experience with is optional. So it's down to your, like, the resources are there, but it's down to you as to whether you take it up. And even in circumstances where I've gone into corporate offices to deliver nutrition talks, it's very much been like, I'm in the boardroom and however many individuals want to come along can come along. It's not mandatory. And I think that's a really nice way to do it, because actually, it's meeting individuals at different stages of life. And sometimes we're just not ready for that information. Like, I have been exactly the same, not with nutrition, but with other areas of my life. I have been at the point where I'm like, I'm just not ready to take in this next challenge, or, I'm not ready to commit to a 6-day-a-week exercise program. I'm not quite there, and that's fine. And I don't think it's an employer's job to force those things onto individuals, but it's really nice that we have got those resources. And I think, going back to that whole idea of the capitalist view of wellness, we are in a capitalist view of wellness. If you look at the wellbeing industry, or you look at the idea of productivity in a workplace, it is there, like it's plain to see. But then if we really are looking at the difference between the 90s and now, we still have to work just as hard. At least there are things to support us now. So I'm not necessarily viewing this as an extension to capitalism, but rather maybe a benefit of.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. There's the ethical question mark, but then you think, well, what's the alternative? We just carry on with the same expectations, but we actually don't have the nice smoothie bar twice a week or whatever it is. But what's your experience then with the effectiveness of these programs? Have you seen a bit of a before and after of the implementation of these in offices, or people who have taken a bit more of a like serious view on it in terms of like the office environment itself?
Some, and I would say by far the biggest benefit have just been to retain individuals in the business. Health is really hard to measure, and it's really hard to measure, especially in a corporate level. Also, why would you want to? Because that's a lot of really personal data that you probably don't feel comfortable giving to your employer, and nor should you want to have to. So I think that aspect of it is really hard to measure, but the kind of things that you would be looking at are a reduction in absenteeism, a reduction in sick days, and better rates of attrition for employees. And, they're quite nice. I think the biggest successes of these wellbeing programs are often that it helps to bring people together. I've seen some really beautiful examples where companies have focused on team building days a lot as part of their wellbeing program. And that has really helped to bring their teams together. Like it literally did what it said on the tin. It's great for well-being, but actually the biggest benefit to it has been that the workforce just works better together. They have a better understanding. It's not just a case of turning up to your job and sitting in front of a desk. It's now a case of turning up and being part of a team. And I think as humans, we need that. And, when I look at nutrition, I'm like, yeah, it's important. But I mentioned this earlier, it's also really important to have a really good social life. There was a really odd statistic not long ago that basically said loneliness kills more people than eating red meat. And I'm very with that from the perspective of we do need to pay more attention to having better social areas of our life, because it's a big part of health. And if we can achieve that in some kind of like a work utopian level, then why not?
Yeah, we spend so much of our time at work. If we're neglecting that social aspect, it's just exactly really what I was saying initially, of it can impact so many different things. We're worried, we're really anxious, if we hone in on that example, about our nutrition and the money that we're spending on our food. If we carry on with that example, then it's impacting our sleep, and therefore it's impacting our health in a different way. And you just think there's so many different levels, and you can apply that in so many different ways. Obviously that's just one example of it, but it is quite an interesting take on it. It's, you can optimize. I feel like you can have a drinking game on the amount of times I've said optimize in this podcast, but the more you optimize one element, you can't neglect the other side. It has to be that sustainable wholesale view on it. And I'm really interested in this sort of corporate side of it, because I think the corporate side to health is something that I've not really touched on, and I think so many people, it's a realistic view of what people actually will be living through. So what sort of questions are people asking you? What are they struggling with? What are the common frequently asked questions that they come up with of, okay, you're a nutritionist, you come in here to help them improve their health and well-being within work, but broadly, I guess, in life, but in the work environment. What are they asking?
Sadly, and I really hate that this is happening, there is still a lot of questions about what we should be cutting out of our diet in order to be healthier and in order to feel better. People are much more worried about their health now than they ever have been, from my experience. I don't know how that compares on the realistic data. I'm purely talking about my experience of going into offices.
Do you think it's worry? You use the word worry there. Is it awareness or worry?
Both. I would say somewhere in the intersection, but there is definitely, I mean, look, I'm generalizing quite a lot here. There is definitely a huge divide, because I will go and deliver talks and nutrition programs at anything from a factory setting to like a super duper all singing all shining corporate office. So there is definitely a difference in the type of questions that I'm getting in each of those settings. There is a lot more awareness around health. Awareness is probably a nice one, but that is now building this idea of, should I be cutting out sausage rolls from my diet, or should I be cutting out burgers from my diet? So sadly, I'm still getting a lot of those questions, but luckily by the time that I've given the talk or I've delivered the program, the questions really changed. And that's because my talks are very much focused around adding those nutrients in and how we can realistically look at it. I've been very lucky that I had a lot of very funny client examples with how adding nutrients in works, and I often draw on those in order to really get individuals on side and getting them to focus on the right things rather than the cutting out. So what are we adding in rather than what are we stripping out?
Can you humour us and give us one of these examples? A little taster.
Oh, do you know? So I was really, really new into nutrition when this one happened, but it's probably the best example of how adding nutrients in works. I had a chap that came to me who was very definitely sent by his wife. And when I say very definitely, like, it was genuinely the first thing he said to me. So he came, this is when I was still seeing individuals one-to-one, face-to-face. Now everything's online. And he came through the door and it was like, arms crossed, going, right, the wife sent me. I don't really want to be here. I like my beer. Don't take the beer away. And by the way, she's probably shrinking my clothes. And I was so new in nutrition. I just graduated a couple of months ago. When you're brand new into a job, you've got all of like the technical knowledge, but zero of the people skills. I was 100% that. And I didn't really know what to do with him. So I was like, okay, just come in and sit down and we'll see what we can do here. And he sat down and then proceeded to cry for 45 minutes. He had an absolute cry, like a proper snot cry. Like, when you drank too much Prosecco with your mates and
the ugly cry. The ugly cry.
It was messy. And it transpired that he was on the verge of type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and he had no idea what to do because his mates were all down the pub. And he really enjoyed going to the pub because that's where all his mates were. But the problem is that I literally had, so he's cried for 45 minutes. I have 15 minutes to try and give him something to help with all of those health parameters and to help him feel a little bit better, but still without stripping anything out of his diet. So I literally ended up holding a plate in front of him and I went, look, if you look at a plate of food, every plate of food that you look at from today, can you just make half of it veg? His diet was very beige, so I was like, more whole foods this can't really hopefully go that wrong. And he looked at me and goes, he's like crying slightly, was probably going to agree to absolutely anything. He was like, does that mean salad on my kebab? I was like, you know what? If that's how you understand it, it's great. It just, yeah, like just half veg, whatever you want to do. And I genuinely thought that I lost this guy and he would never come back because he just spent 45 minutes not crying. And he came back a couple of months later, and genuinely the first thing that I noticed was the colour was back in his cheeks. The first time I saw him, it was, a little bit grey, not particularly looking great. This time around, he was running through the door with energy. The colour was back in his cheeks. He was looking really good. He did lose some weight, and we did manage to shift some of those parameters of health. But to me, the biggest win was the fact that he was full of energy and he was feeling really good. And I asked him, I was like, okay, did we stop going to the pub? Like, what happened here? And he was like, no, I just started adding the veg in and I started to feel really good. So he said, now I might, he still teases me to this day, he's like, I might have a glass of water with a pint if I feel like it. But to me, that was such a beautiful example of how adding in nutrients really works. And I feel we've really lost that focus of the beauty of adding in the nutrients rather than just focusing on what we need to cut out.
Yeah.
So I often use that.
That's a great example because I also think it really displays tangibly what the optimization actually looks like, because it's not that he's shrunk down to a tiny size and that he's not touching alcohol and that he's doing X, Y, and Z. It's that he has the energy back. He has the color in his cheeks. He therefore looks more healthy and looks more human. And his quality of life is better. It's not that he's going to live 20 years longer, 10 years longer, 5 years longer. Like, maybe he will, maybe he won't. No one knows. There's so many different variables that will factor into that. But it's that quality of life that's bringing your step. And I think that's exactly what wellness is all about. It's getting that energy back so that your day to day is better. It is, you feel better, you enjoy it a bit more. So yeah, very interesting example.
You know what? You touched on something that's actually really interesting in terms of the quality of life. I think with this in specific, the most interesting thing for me is that it gave him the capacity to then go, well, actually, this makes me feel good. What else can I achieve? It's almost brought him extra freedom to be able to do and live his life and do what he wants to do and not have to think, oh, I'm too exhausted to do anything that I want to do. So I think done well, it really, it gives us extra, like it helps us get extra out of our life, which I think is the sweet spot.
Mm-hmm. And it's that lack of rigid rules that you're going into it with, because it's that one thing that he can apply. Just, what we were saying earlier about if you have every sort of type of wellness optimization, which there are so many out there. Social media, we touched on, like the amount of information that has come out in the last 10 years from when you started to when now. We're almost over consuming everything. We're bombarded by it that we don't actually know where to start. Whereas you said to him, okay, get a bit of color on your plate. Half the plate has some sort of something from the ground that resembles food, that resembles a plant. And that was something that was actually, he was able to do that. And therefore, maybe he does want to drink more water, or he does want to spend more time outside, or he does want to, I'm making up things now, but there is that want to do that then, because the eating better, eating more vegetables becomes less of that hurdle because it's become that routine. So he doesn't think about it probably now because it's just what he does. So therefore he has capacity to think, okay, what am I doing next? What's my next step? Whereas if you gave him a list of 5 things to do, he probably would have stopped doing all of them. He might have done one if it went well. But then it becomes work. And then our wellness becomes another project that we're working on. And I think maybe that's where a lot of the time we can go wrong, is we have the motivation. We want to see our nutritionists, our dietitians, our personal trainers, but we almost go in so hot that we burn ourselves out before we can actually have any sort of behavior change, any sort of lifestyle change, because we change everything at once, because that makes us feel like we're making progress, which we probably will. but then we'll stop because it's such a drastic change and we have to carry on living our lives. You know, it's not like we're going off to live on an island and go on a retreat full time. We can have a lovely retreat that we pay to go on and we feel amazing afterwards, but it's not real life. And it is that what is sustainable in terms of those small behaviour changes.
Yeah, 100%. You completely hit the nail on the head there. I think this idea of, transformations in diets is so badly rooted in diet culture as well. We just don't need it. We don't need a new program of eating. We don't need diet plans. What we need is those small sustainable changes that help us feel better and buy us a bit more freedom.
Mm-hmm. Simple. Amazing. And you talked a little bit earlier about where you actually specialize in terms of later in life, how to, work your nutrition, what we should be doing to maybe take care of ourselves. But if we sort of unpack that a little bit, why is it that we are later in life and needing to take care of ourselves? Is it because our diet approach has changed? Should we be changing how we eat as we age? Or is it maybe we don't really care anymore? Or what is the situations that you sort of see occurring that actually has led to the situation of we need to help these people, we need to fix this problem? Is it something that people have been living through, or is it just something that's happens at a certain stage?
You know what? We have absolutely cracked aging from the perspective of we are living really long lives now. And it's incredible. But what isn't really keeping up with those really long lives is a healthy life expectancy. So I think now in Britain, you can expect to live to around 83-ish. That's our life expectancy. But the healthy life expectancy is like 20 years below that in some regions, not in all, but it really varies. But by and large, there's this huge gap between healthy life expectancy and life expectancy. So the reason why I really went down on that route is because there is this really big growing aging population who has the capacity to live a much healthier life rather than just expect that we get old and then our health goes down the pan. It doesn't really have to be that way. And when I did my master's a couple of years ago, I spent a lot of my time researching what those parameters really mean. And what I found is that as we age, our nutrient requirements increase rather than decrease. I think there is this misconception that once we hit a certain age, it's, a cup of tea and a biscuit and that will do for lunch. And that actually couldn't be the furthest from the truth. But whilst I was researching to try and figure out what the nutrient intake really means, what I found is that in order to feed someone over the age of 65 well, we should be having like 3 trays of food in order to meet the nutrient requirements. So it actually does get more complex as we age, and our nutrient requirements increase rather than decrease would be the bit that I put emphasis on.
But our appetites would decrease. You see people who, even our parents or whatever, they might have smaller meals at lunch, or they might not even have lunch, or they'll just have a teeny tiny dinner. So how does that work?
Exactly. That is the challenge. That is genuinely the challenge.
So is it true scientifically that our appetites would decrease, or what?
Yeah.
How does that kind of come into it?
Yeah, our appetites do decrease as we age. That is a thing. But our capacity to get the nutrients out of food also decreases. So actually what we should be doing is getting more nutrients in rather than having a cup of tea and a biscuit as a meal.
And what does that look like? What is getting the more nutrients in? Because realistically, I'm sure you're not giving people like 3 trays full of food for them to eat and complete every single day. So what do you do? How do you approach it?
Of course not. So interestingly, about 3 years ago, I started working with a luxury care home group. They're based in London, and they do an incredible job of this exact theory of adding more nutrients in rather than just focusing on meals. And what I did for them is to develop a hero ingredients list that is foods that have really, really high nutrient levels. And we focus the meals on that. So say, for example, there is a recipe that I published on my social media not long ago. In fact, it was last week. It was a venison ragu. And that venison ragu would be like a nutrient-dense meal that would contain a lot of nutrients, but without having to be huge portion sizes. So it hits all the right things. It's got tons of zinc in there, which is required, selenium, it's got loads of protein. So it's focusing on specific nutrients, but looking at how many nutrients we can cram into a single meal. Because I'm trying to explain the aspect of nutrient density without boring you to death. So bear with me. Right, if we were just to focus on sandwiches, right, the equivalent would be a tray of sandwiches that are two sandwiches high, or you could have a normal size bowl of venison ragu. So what I had to do is just really focusing on foods that contain a lot of nutrients from the outset in order to get them into normal meals.
That makes sense. So, okay, so I'm looking at a plate, and do I have a bit of meat on it? I've got a bit of veg on it, maybe some potatoes, or what are you actually looking at broad scale when people can identify this food tangibly in their life of what actually is good for me and what is not? What would you give as examples of your favourite go-tos?
Are we talking about meals specifically, or are we talking about like ratios of carbs and proteins and veg?
I'd probably say ratios, but if we make it quite obvious of what exactly we're talking about, because obviously, you mentioned the venison there with the zinc, and which is fantastic, but if I look at a plate, I don't see zinc, I see venison. So if we can break it all down.
No, that makes absolute sense. Very good point. Thanks for picking me up on that one. Okay, right. As a nutritionist, what I try and move my clients towards, an emphasis on moving my clients towards, because I think this is the bit that does require work, is remember with that guy when I said, look, every plate of food that you look at, if you could just make half of it veg, that would get more nutrients in. So the plates of food that I try and move my clients towards are basically half veg, quarter carbs and quarter protein. That is in its simplest form what we're looking at. There is individual variability. So those proportions will change depending on how you live your life. But if I was to really badly generalize this, that's what I'm trying to move most of my nutrition clients towards.
And is that for each meal, or is there a specific focus? What should we be focusing on? Should we be neglecting one in favor of the other, or what's a sustainable approach?
So I try and look at it based on what's sustainable for that individual in front of me. Sometimes we do it meal by meal. So sometimes we work on, if someone is used to having cereal for breakfast, as an example, which is pure carbs with maybe a tiny bit of protein from the milk. I try and look at how we can change that so it contains more fruit and more veg and more complex carbohydrates and more protein. But if someone's really, really busy and they go, right, my lunch is basically trying to grab an apple in an office, I try and look at those ratios across the day. So it's meeting that individual to where they are, but it really doesn't matter whether you look at it meal to meal or look at it on a daily basis. Moving towards those ratios hopefully introduces more nutrients.
And silly question, but in terms of you're working with, say the care home example, or people in later in life anyway, what's the difference that you see? What's the benefit that you see of them taking a bit more interest in their diet or putting a bit more focus on that? What change does it bring?
Do you know what? So I don't know how much you know about care homes specifically, but very much the idea of someone going to a care home was so that they could be fed enough calories to survive. And now the realm is really changing towards, well, how about we see if we can make individuals better? How about we see if they can have a bit more energy? And how about we see if the brain can work somewhat better and actually improve quality of life? And that's what we're seeing with improvements in food and improvements in nutrient intake, is that the quality of life increases. And that's the bit that I get really excited about, because actually that's what it should be about. We should be enabling ourselves to have a better quality of life through these efforts, not the efforts squash our quality of life.
What do you think quality of life means? Like, how would you define quality of life?
Interesting. I mean, okay, so on a very rudimentary level, quality of life would be being able to live. Do you know what? It's subjective, isn't it? but it would just be able to live a better life given the parameters of your life. Being able to do a little bit more, not needing necessarily to have a lie down at 1 o'clock because that's when your energy run out. Being able to sleep a little bit better. Energy is probably a really good measure, actually.
Yeah, I think the word need there is really hit the nail on the head. You can have a nap because you want to, but not needing to.
Yeah.
It's just being you better, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a phrase that's kind of thrown about, but it's interesting just to stop and be like, what does it actually mean?
You make a really great point.
Yeah.
I mean, what does it actually mean? Because it is so subjective.
So subjective. Yeah. Maybe everyone listening to this, have a little think. What does that actually mean for you as well? You know, what does my quality of life look like if I'm striving after it, if I'm focusing on it? It's an interesting point. But as we come to a close, you know, we've talked a lot about different stages of nutrition and your experience as a nutritionist as well. You alluded to there's a bit of a decade marker coming up, which seems an appropriate time to ask, what's your biggest takeaway in your 10 years of being a nutritionist? What's your biggest moment and realization of, oh my goodness, this is something, this has happened, this is what happens? What sticks out in your 10 years?
Do you know, 10 years feels like I'm only just beginning. I know that sounds really silly because it is 10 years, it's a decade, it's actually quite a lot, but in something so science focused and something so human focused, it really just feels like the beginning. I would say the thing that really stands out, I can't really quantify, but working with individuals and seeing that transformation that they go, I hate the word transformation, by the way, but seeing the change that they go through by introducing additional nutrients and seeing that penny drop when they realize that they can feel better, that's what I really love. And that's really hard to explain because definitely from my experience, there was a real turning point in my early 20s, late teens, when I realized what good feels like. And when you get someone to that level where they realize what good feels like and they realize what not good feels like, it is just so eye-opening and so wholesomely fulfilling. I would say that's probably my biggest takeaway from it.
And it's probably that quality of life, because obviously quality of life, again, as you say, is subjective because there's better quality of life and worse quality of life. But if you help people feel that better quality of life than they had before, then I guess that is the most rewarding thing, isn't it? Like the hopelessness that people can come in with, because it's such a fundamental part of the diet is literally the fuel that our body and our brains run on through the day. Then it's very, very fundamental. So yeah, interesting point. And Eva, if people want to work with you, read your research, read your work, see what you're up to, where should they go?
My website's probably a good start. So that's wholefoodwarrior.co.uk, and then my Instagram, also Whole Food Warrior. I actually do quite a lot of nutrition education on Instagram. I mentioned right now I'm going through some omega-3 bits. Last week we were chatting about iron quite a lot. So I'm very big on making that information accessible to individuals that want it in a way that's very objective and non-scary and non-vilifying, and really it's just there to provide good quality information. So yeah, they're the two.
Amazing. I'll link those below. And thank you so much, Eva. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me here.